in terms of your growth business model, if you decouple from the leverage model where you're, flogging in hundreds of young MBAs on high daily rates and paying them a pittance, how do you envisage growth that doesn't necessarily rely on you being there? Do you have an intellectual property vision, for example, that would allow you? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, actually, no, our model is, to have very high skilled people doing small projects on high, with high margins. So how do you see that going forward?
Well, I would, first of all, I'd just challenge that to the thing you just said about MBAs and so on. I think every consulting firm pretty much we're glorified taxi drivers. We can only make money when we're awake, which is a challenge. So scale in any consulting firm traditionally has meant you've just got to get more and more people. And I was talking to somebody years ago, and they were running a boutique firm, and they told me how many people they had. So I said, look, your revenue is roughly about this much. I said, how do you know that? I said, well, all I do is multiply by a number of people by the average daily rate, blah, blah, blah. And, I got to within 10%. So, that's one of the reasons why we don't want to scale people. Firstly, because I think once you scale beyond a certain point, you then by very definition have to become average, and we don't want to be an average firm. But also because, as I said, we actively don't want to do that, then what we've got to look at is other ways for us to monetize. And so one of the things we're actively looking at now, we already use sort of leading edge technology within our business from a sort of collaboration perspective. And yes, we are developing some intellectual property around, which is very simple intellectual property in terms of the way that we work with our clients. But one of the things that we're looking at now is, so as you sort of point out, we work predominantly with financial services institutions, and that's really investment banking, wealth management, insurance, and investment management. What we are doing is we are looking, there's two ways we're looking to technology. So the first one is external. But what we're looking to do is we're looking to invest in sort of angel or seed stage, so in FinTech and InsurTech, where into, I guess, thematic investing, where we see there's a strong likelihood that technology is likely to get picked up by our client segments. So that does a number of things. The first one is it helps us educate ourselves on the new technologies that are coming through, which I think is important anyway. It helps us, often as investors, we will then get involved in either advising or as a significant shareholder, sort of being a board member of that. And so we can help shape the direction and always get more information as well. And then what we can do is also take that technology to our clients. So we obviously, so from the inside, we can say, look, we're seeing this technology. We think this could be a really sort of helpful in terms of looking at what you're doing. So for a good example at the moment is sort of the digitization of the wealth management sector. So a lot of wealth management wealth management firms and private banks have traditionally been, it's all around more of an advisory, it's face-to-face, and that's changing. People now want to consume stuff digitally, do things on their phones, do things on laptops and stuff. And the face-to-face, the traditional private banks, so, Coutts, UBS, Credit Suisse, that seems to be going away a bit. And so what we're now looking at is sort of what are the technologies that are really going to enable that transformation. So that's one thing, which is around sort of looking at sort of InsurTech and FinTech, which is we think is going to help drive changes in our client segments. The second piece is to look at what can we do internally. So if I look at, when I've worked at big consulting firms in the past, or big professional services firms in the past, then typically they're very good at advising companies in how to deploy technology. They're not very good at necessarily using that internally.
It's like business schools in universities. They're and actually psychiatrists are all the maddest people I know. And I guess all the builders we know have half-finished houses.
Exactly. So it's do as I say, not do as I do. So the other part of it at the moment, so what we're doing is we've just commissioned some work to look at how we can sort of harness things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., internally. So at the moment, we're still a very, very small organization. We're sort of less than 20 people globally. But what we're trying to do is understand, as we grow, what are the kind of capabilities that we're going to need internally, what are the kind of data we're going to have,
Yep.
and how can we use that, whether that's through developing intellectual property, whether
Yep.
that's through sales automation, being able to potentially automate some elements of consulting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what that would necessarily look like at the moment, but using sort of artificial intelligence and so on in terms of our own internal capability, and making what we think is a pretty streamlined business already. How can we make that even better? Yep. And how can we then use the technology to help scale us? As I said, I don't really want to sort of build out a big firm in terms of numbers of people, but what I do want to have is a leading firm. And if we can do that through technology, leveraging technology, then I think that's a very good way forward. And at the moment, the research that we've done is we're not finding anybody who's, certainly at scale, is looking to do anything similar at the moment.
You're the first person that I have heard use that strategy internally. So, obviously, most of the large consulting firms are using AI and machine learning to replace analysts. So you can already see the shape of some of the big models, where it used to be like that, and now it's more of a vase shape, where the analysts are getting booted out in exchange for cheaper and better AI. But you're the first person I've heard speak about using that internally as a capacity. That's quite interesting.
I think, if you look at the professional services, and I think the same is true of, it's not just consulting, it's audit, it's law as well. The same thing is happening. So, if you look, if you're a junior lawyer at a law firm, you're spending your time reviewing contracts. Now, there's artificial intelligence which can do that much better and much more quickly, and so that there's less of a need for having people that. Now, you could argue that then you can deploy those people to do more value add work. But when I graduated, I was trusted with photocopying, and to be honest, that I thought that was way below me. But knowing what I knew then, I was probably well above my limits. But I think it'll be interesting to see whether that vase shape, where as people permeate through the business, that where there's fewer people coming in at the bottom, where that permeates through to sort of smaller, a more narrow pyramid, or whether you only recruit a small number of people at the bottom of the base, and then what you do is you bring in people from industry or elsewhere once they've got a bit more experience. But I still think that model is still susceptible to the fact that you're only really scaling people, not using technology to drive it out. And to be honest, if you're using technology to replace somebody you're paying, say, £30,000-40,000 a year to, I'd argue that that's not really fundamentally changing the way you do business. It's just automating some probably graduate entry clerical level of work.
Yes. Yeah. Give me an example of how. Now, I understand that I've got a very, very good friend who works in AI on the document management system for the government. And they're cutting out huge swathes of costs. But give me an example of how you might see machine learning working internally for you.
So I think this is where we're still at the very early stages of working out what this is going to look like. But I think one of the challenges that sort of large firms have is that they tend to use relatively sort of siloed and structured information systems. Often, things are stuck in Microsoft SharePoint or or Lotus Notes or something, and it's very, very hard to find. And I think one of the things that sort of we're looking to do is to create something. It's like you see sort of large organizations talking about data lakes, data pools, and so on, and then using artificial intelligence to sort of really sort of make sense of unstructured data. Now, as a consultant, you sort of talked about sort of lawyers and documents and so on. Now, we do produce documents, but fundamentally, I also think there's going to be a movement away from having a bunch of Word reports or PowerPoints or PDFs to actually having most of the work we do now is actually, because we spend most of our time at our clients, the IP actually is moving from us to our clients. But what I do think there is, in terms of identifying ways of leveraging not only internal data that we have, but also pulling in data from external sources,
Sure.
and then using that. So I think it's very much at the early stages yet, because there's no blueprint in terms of, McKinsey has done this very
Yes. Yes.
successfully and we can copy it. I don't think anybody's there yet, but
Yeah.
I think it would be, with us being a virtual firm, we can very easily open sort of up our pipes, if you like, to sort of other industry sectors or other data providers, and then look to pull that information in. I think one of the challenges that you often find with professional services firms is that they guard their intellectual property very tightly. And it's more of we don't want our competitors to understand what we're doing, which is fine and completely understandable. But then that leads to a very, very kind of insular view of the world, in the sense that you then get people thinking, well, I'm going to do things the KPMG way or the EY way, and this is our methodology, and this is how we do things, and nothing really changes. Whereas I think if you take a more holistic and more macro view of it, in terms of what you're trying to achieve, it's like what we're trying to achieve is we're actually helping our outcomes or our clients' outcomes, and if we can develop a system that can deliver that, and we open ourselves up into working with other providers, then I think that and harness that to our clients' sort of strategies and outcomes, then I think we're in a much better place. I think at the moment, sort of the traditional consulting model is still very much a client has a problem, works out that it doesn't have the capacity or time to do it itself, and outsources the brain to the brains trust, who comes in and does it. Brings in some intellectual property, does its stuff, and then goes away again. And so I think that perpetuates the model of intellectual property being generated internally and being maintained internally. Whereas I think it's actually, we should be looking to, we might sort of have the idea, but what we should be then doing is bringing that out to sort of to a much broader audience than would be traditionally the case.